For millions of Black Americans, Sunday morning wasn't just a day for church. It was a sanctuary. It was the one place where a people, systematically denied their own dignity, could reclaim it in full. It was the sound of a choir swelling with a joy that defied circumstance, the sight of women crowned in glorious hats, a citadel of belonging in a hostile world. It was a place where you were always somebody. But this sacred space was also a war room. This sanctuary was a headquarters for revolution. For centuries, one institution has been the unshakable bedrock for Black Americans, serving as both a spiritual refuge and a command center for justice. It was here that a faith first used as a weapon to preach obedience and justify slavery was radically transformed into an engine of liberation. This is the story of how that happened. This is the story of how hope, community, and resistance, forged in the crucible of unimaginable oppression, fueled a revolution that's still shaping America today. The story of the African American church doesn't start in a building with a steeple and a pulpit. It starts in whispers. It starts in the hush harbors and praise houses of the antebellum South secret gatherings deep in the woods. Far from the watchful eyes of the overseer. During slavery, Christianity was often presented to enslaved Africans as a tool of control. Slave owners and missionaries pushed a version of the faith with slave catechisms designed to reinforce their enslavement, teaching that being property was God's will. But the enslaved people heard a different message in the scriptures. They didn't hear a God of subjugation. They heard a God of liberation. They saw their own struggle in the story of the Israelites' exodus from Egypt, identified with a God who delivered his people from bondage. And in these secret meetings, something extraordinary happened. African spiritual traditions call in sponse, ecstatic dance, honoring the ancestors began to merge with the stories of Christianity, creating a unique, resilient, and powerful new faith. These weren't just religious services, they were acts of spiritual resistance. The Negro spirituals that filled the night air were more than just songs. They were complex signals, carrying coded messages of hope, escape, and defiance. This was the invisible institution, the church, before there was a church. And it was here that the first pillar of its enduring power was forged: community. In a system designed to break people apart, these secret gatherings stitched them together. These were some of the very first spaces where Black people could govern themselves, nurture their own leaders, and affirm each other's humanity when the entire world screamed otherwise. It was in these circles of faith that the culture itself was kept safe, preserved from a society that sought to erase it. But a people determined to be free can't stay invisible forever. That desire for self-determination eventually burst into the open. In 1794, a former slave named Richard Allen led a protest against segregation at a white Methodist church in Philadelphia. When he and other Black members were physically pulled from their knees while praying, they walked out, determined to create their own institution. That act of defiance led to the founding of the African Methodist Episcopal, or AIM Church, the first independent Black denomination in the United States. This was a monumental shift. The church moved from being a secret network to a public institution, a physical and spiritual home built by Black people for Black people. It was the first of many denominations that would form the institutional backbone of Black America, helping communities rely less on white institutions and providing a base to challenge racism. The church was becoming, out of necessity, everything. As the dream of Reconstruction collapsed into the nightmare of Jim Crow, the African American church cemented its role as the second pillar of its strength, hope, in an era of segregation, disenfranchisement, and the constant terror of lynching. The church became more important than ever a refuge for the soul. It was, for many, the only place in the world where a Black person wasn't a second-class citizen, but a child of God, worthy of dignity and respect. It was an alternative society where the values of equality and humanity were the law of the land. Inside the four walls of the church, you weren't judged by the color of your skin, but by the content of your character and the spirit in your heart. It was a sanctuary from the daily humiliations of a racist society. And this is where the idea of the church being everything truly blossomed. Because Black people were barred from public libraries, schools, banks, and concert halls, the church had to become all of those things. It was the community center hosting fish fries and social events. It was the school running literacy programs. It was the political forum where the community could gather to talk. It was a hub for economic empowerment, providing a safety net for the most vulnerable. And it was the concert hall. You can't talk about the Black church without talking about the music that is its lifeblood. The spirituals of slavery evolved, infused with a new energy, giving birth to gospel music. This wasn't just background noise. It was theology set to a beat. It was the sound of hope itself. The music, the call and response preaching, the emotional expression of the service, it all created an atmosphere of catharsis and affirmation. It was here that the idea of somebodyness was preached and sung and shouted into existence, a powerful antidote to a society that constantly messaged Black inferiority. Week after week, the church affirmed your humanity, giving people the spiritual fortitude to endure the unendurable. It was proof that even in the darkest of times, hope, when shared in community, could not be extinguished. If community was the foundation and hope was the sanctuary, then resistance was the church's righteous sword. By the mid-20th century, the institution that had been forged in secret and sustained a people for generations was ready to take center stage. It became the engine, the headquarters, and the moral compass of the civil rights movement. It's no exaggeration to say the church was the parent of the movement. This wasn't an accident. A theological tradition called the Black social gospel had been brewing for decades, insisting that true Christian faith was incompatible with racism and demanded a direct confrontation with injustice. It framed the fight for equality not just as a political goal, but as a divine mandate. This prophetic tradition, the call to speak truth to power, produced a generation of leaders who were both preachers and activists. The most famous, of course, was the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., a Baptist minister whose calls for justice were rooted violations in his faith. But he wasn't alone. Leaders like the Ralph Abernathy, Rev. C.T. Vivian, and Fannie Lou Hamer all drew their strength and strategy from the church. Organizations like the Southern Christian Leadership Conference (SCLC) were founded by clergy to organize and mobilize. The great campaigns of the movement were born in the basements of churches like Dexter Avenue Baptist in Montgomery and Ebenezer Baptist in Atlanta. The Montgomery bus boycott, the sit-ins, the marchettes, they were all planned in church meeting rooms and funded by the collection plates of congregants. The church gave the movement everything it needed. It offered up its buildings as meeting halls. It mobilized its vast network of members, turning them into a disciplined army of nonviolent protesters. It provided a built-in communication system through the pulpit. And maybe most importantly, it gave the movement its moral authority. By framing the struggle for civil rights as a battle for the soul of the nation, the church lifted the movement above politics and into the realm of a righteous crusade. Now, it wasn't a monolith. There were intense debates inside the church. Some clergy feared the violent backlash from white communities and pushed for more cautious strategies. Not every preacher was as willing as Dr. King to embrace direct action. The divisions and fears were real. Despite those differences, the collective power of the church was undeniable. Its activism, its resources, and its moral voice were absolutely crucial to passing the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, achievements that forever changed the nation. The victories of the civil rights movement didn't end the church's story. They just started a new, more complex chapter. Today, the African American church stands at a crossroads, navigating a rapidly changing world while holding on to its historic mission. It continues to be a vital force, adapting its methods to address 21st century challenges. One of the most powerful examples is public health. Recognizing that systemic inequities lead to health disparities, Black churches have become frontline community health hubs. Many have health ministries offering everything from blood pressure screenings in the fellowship hall to programs promoting better nutrition. And it works because people trust the church, bridging the gap to a healthcare system where many have historically faced racism. National programs are even partnering with churches to reduce disparities in heart disease, diabetes, and to destigmatize mental illness, framing it as a part of spiritual well-being. The church's prophetic voice also echoes in modern social justice movements. Congregations are still at the forefront of fights for voting rights, economic equality, and criminal justice reform. But its relationship with contemporary movements like Black Lives Matter is more complex. On one hand, many see BLM as a direct heir to the church's legacy. Its call for justice resonates with the core beliefs of the Black social gospel. And yet, there's tension. Younger activists, including many in BLM, are often more secular. They have challenged the church for being too slow or too quiet on certain issues, particularly regarding gender roles and LGBTQ equality. This has created a disconnect, with some young people finding their spiritual homes outside of traditional church walls. Like many religious institutions, the church is facing a demographic challenge with younger generations. This has forced a period of real soul-searching. Churches are grappling with how to stay relevant and how to bridge the generational divide. Many are embracing technology and social media to reach new audiences. Congregations are wrestling with how to become more inclusive. This internal debate between personal piety and social action, between tradition and transformation, isn't a sign of death. It's a sign of a living, breathing institution grappling with its own future and fighting to remain a cornerstone of African American life. From the secret spirituals sung in the darkness of slavery to the resounding hymns that fueled a generation of protesters, the African American church has been a source of incredible resiliency. For centuries, it had to be so much more than just a house of worship. It was one of the first Black-run institutions, a community hub, an education center, a cultural incubator, a political headquarters, and a spiritual sanctuary. It was and is the place where a people could organize, find hope, and demand justice. Today, its form may be changing. The debates inside its walls are evolving, and its relationship with a new generation of activists is dynamic. Yet, its core mission endures. It continues to serve the holistic needs of its community, fighting for both spiritual salvation and physical well-being. For justice in the hereafter, and justice right here on earth. The story of the African American church is the story of a people who took a faith intended to pacify them and turned it into a weapon for their own liberation. It is the story of an unshakable bedrock, a beacon of hope, and a catalyst for change. And its profound legacy, forged in faith and fired by the relentless pursuit of freedom, is a story that is still being written, continuing to transform not just a community, but the very soul of America.